We're sitting here staring at what is likely to be West Coast olefins, or what is proposed to be West Coast olefins. Now, you were kind of quarterbacking that project when it was first announced at the Marriott. And so, what sold you on this project?
Well, I was perfectly clear, because we've got a number of procedures and processes to go through, Cheryl. My point was that when West Coast came to the community and said, we're interested in developing here, and this is the development we want to put in your community, I knew there were processes in place, and we're going to talk about those, obviously, but it was an indication to me that the city and all of the work we've done through Economic Development Office and Development Services, that people were looking at Prince George for opportunities, both from an investment and development perspective. So, from that perspective, I thought, we're on the map, and it's important to be on that map. And that's why when they came to Prince George and made their public announcement, and we attended and saw what the project was, knowing full well it had steps to go through, here we are, and we'll see what happens through the processes.
It's funny, some people would suggest, why here? As opposed to, the suggestion was perhaps up in Salmon Valley somewhere. Why here? And why not in Salmon Valley?
Well, when a developer comes to the city, they take a look at the city, they take a look at areas that they think will meet their development purposes. And it's the developer that chooses the location. And it's not up to myself or council or development services to dissuade them from their preference. And their preference was here because it's located near rail, and I know, yes, the Hart industrial property is the same, but they like the location. They like the fact that it was closer to the community. They didn't have to worry about transportation of employees to the other location, and so they're proceeding under their own decision that this is the prime location and the perfect location for them.
The argument being from those who, the likes of Pacha, is that it's our airshed is such a compromised airshed. Exactly. We all know that. Yep. That's not news. And yet here we are in the bowl, technically, proposing an industrial project, a huge industrial project, billion-dollar industrial project. Is there not an argument to be made there?
Sure, and I think we've heard that argument. I've met with folks from Pacha, and I've heard from various people that, look, this is not the location that it should be put in. So again, I say that they have an environmental assessment process to go through from the provincial perspective. We've got a process to go through around rezoning. So at the end of the day, once the environmental assessment process is done, we take, my assumption is, and will probably happen, that West Coast will come to council for a first and second reading on the rezoning, and at the third reading is the public hearing. When you talk about me being a champion of this, I'm a champion of people considering our city for development. And we wanted to put ourselves in that position, and I think West Coast is an example that went around and looked and saw, you know what, Prince George is our choice. There's a rezoning process that needs to take place for that property. So at third reading, the public will have an opportunity to come in and express their concerns or their support for that project to council.
So paint me a picture of there's a lot of potential with the project as well.
Absolutely.
There's the consequences. People say, why are we supporting a plastics? I mean, plastics the ugly word now of the climate change world, and it's in the compromised airshed, et cetera, et cetera. But there's possible upsides to it. What are they?
Well, I think if you take the upsides right away, it's employment. It's diversification in a community that thrives on diversification. So let me talk about employment. The numbers that we have heard from the proponent at the public meeting was, 800 or 900 during construction, 700 or 800 during operation. And then we take a look at the subsidiary employment from companies that are going to provide, various services. And the diversification of our economy is important. But I also will say, and I also know this, that the environmental assessment is important, and our rezoning is important, Cheryl.
This has been a bit of a controversial
It has
issue.
been. Yep.
It started off as an environmental concern.
Yep.
The culvert was giving way. It was rebuilt and then rebuilt again.
Yep.
And it came in, Willowkill Bridge, it came in way over.
We're seeing increased costs in doing a lot of this work with the repairing of infrastructure or building new infrastructure. I think that we also take a very close look at what is the contingency over and above what we budgeted for. So let's be accurate on the contingency. And you know, we are now getting project lists that will show us where each individual project is at, the stage that it's at, and where we are within the budget allocation. And that's important for us to see.
There was mention at one of the meetings that I attended where you have a 5 and a 10-year capital plan.
Yeah.
And projects that are on the funded and the unfunded, and they can be moved around. It's a fluid document. And then there's a budget allocation over
Right.
the course of the life of that capital plan.
Yeah.
Is that probably the challenge, that when that project was identified 3 or 4 years down the road, it was well under what it is today in dollars?
I think you're absolutely correct. So let's use the library entrance, for example. When it first came to council, I think it was about $1.6 or $7 million. Then we moved it to the unfunded list for a year or two, and then it became 3. And then the council of the day took a look at it and said, look, we've got to move forward on this. By that time, I think it was somewhere around $3.2 million, $3 million, somewhere in that range. And that's what happens. You're exactly right. If we can't afford to do it, say in 2019, and we put it on the unfunded list and it drags in there for 3 or 4 years, we know there's going to be an increase in costs. We're hearing that at times on many of the projects, there's probably a 10% increase in costs for every year that we don't do the project. And a lot of our projects are in that $1 million, $2 million, $3 million range. So that's a chunk of money. My definition of infrastructure is everything that's below ground, everything that is above ground. So below ground infrastructure, water, sewer, above ground sidewalks, curbs, streets, buildings. That really, for me, captures infrastructure.
Now, there was just the facilities above ground infrastructure. Yeah. There was a recent report that was done by the city looking at all of our facilities that we have, about 60. Replacement cost, just those facilities, $440 million.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me.
Right? That's the above ground.
Right.
Has there ever been an assessment of what it would be to replace the underground?
Yeah, we've taken a look at the assessment. That work's starting or is I guess well underway, just to get a value of what that is, because we know from various issues and circumstances that have happened over the last, in 2019. The sinkhole, for example, 2 major breaks on 3rd Avenue, and all of those lines were somewhere around, put in the ground around 1950, 1945, in that area. So that tells us that we've got a lot of infrastructure underground that's of that vintage, and it could go anytime.
What building, I guess, leaps to mind for me is the rolling mix concrete arena.
Yep.
That is being held together with binder twine and duct tape. Really?
It's an old building,
really?
Very old building.
And just to replace that building alone would be something in the order of $24 million, around that.
Yeah, depending on the scope of that and what we thought it needed to be.
So there's going to be some tough decisions to be made.
The rolling mix concrete arena is costing us a lot of money, and it needs a lot more money to keep it up to standard. So at some point in time, we've got to take a look at what we're going to do. And through that assessment, there's been work done on that particular precinct, and I call it that because it's sort of that, the civic center and the library and the Four Seasons pool and the arena, and all of the things that are happening in that area. We need to have a good idea about what's going to happen with that rink at some point. That's the interesting thing, Cheryl, with below ground infrastructure. It's difficult to know. It's impossible to know when it's going to fail. So you're almost, you're reacting to what happens on any given day. But I know that staff are looking diligently at infrastructure below ground and what things we can do to mitigate any potential disaster that we've seen with the sinkhole or other breaks.
How big is the footprint of this community?
Well, I can't give it in hectares or kilometers, but you know, we take care of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of road. So if we're taking care of the road, whether resurfacing, paving, snow plowing, we're also dealing with the infrastructure under the roadway. So there's multiple hundreds of kilometers worth of infrastructure below ground and certainly above ground, like roads, and you know, sidewalks are included in much of that as well.
So we have a road rehab budget.
Yeah.
The Community Works or the Gas Tax Fund, I believe 1.2 or so thereabouts, was going into that road rehab fund until about 2 years ago when it was clawed back and sent in different directions.
Yeah.
Is that a kind of an indication that we've perhaps caught up on the roads?
Some of the stuff we've caught up on. If you take a look at the roads, very pleased with where we are from a pothole perspective. We poured a lot of money into that over the last few years. Road rehabilitation was somewhere around $7 million. As you say, we've clawed a little bit of that back, but I think we're seeing some catch up. We've still got some major areas to do, and staff look at prioritizing that, and we'll have a plan come out in the spring as to what roads we're doing next year. But I think I'm pretty comfortable with where we're at as far as roads go. Doing more work on sidewalks, that's a big piece of the infrastructure. A lot of the sidewalks, particularly at intersections, we're having to do new curb cuts or put curb cuts in that haven't been there for people who are in wheelchairs or mobility devices that need that access onto the crosswalk. So I'm getting more and more comfortable with where we're at from a road sidewalk infrastructure perspective.
Taxes, that came up.
Yep.
That was one of the questions, and so we have a few of the questions. Natalie Ray, for example, why we pay some of the highest property taxes in the province. She would like you to provide some valid and confirmable points as to why her, should pay more to own property in Prince George than any other city.
So one of the things, and let me use last year at the 4% increase, we know that apportionment of that was around the fire hall and the pool, but we're also playing catch up in various areas, and I go back to our infrastructure. We know that we have to deal with this aging infrastructure, and part of that is how do we set the tax rate to meet that demand, and that's what you saw in, that was a portion of what you saw in for 2019. You know, when we take a look at some of the things, some of the communities that we're compared to, I don't see it as an accurate comparison. We are different than Kamloops and Kelowna and Nanaimo when it comes to a couple of things. One is our ability to clear roads, snow, for example. Roads, our infrastructure, and you mentioned it earlier, how big our footprint is. It's a huge footprint. And I would like to see us grow to about 90,000 if we could, to be able to create a broader tax base to take care of that footprint. So there are a number of things, and you know, I think this year you're going to see during budget discussions comparables that I'm certainly going to bring forward with other municipalities and the work they do. I think we need to get that message out to the public.
There's another, Janice Notman, why are our taxes so high and when are we going to get a break? And that was enough. And Brenda Lukniak, I would say, would like to see Mayor and Council be a little more frugal in their spending. Are you getting that message?
Absolutely.
I think that message came across when we had the cluster of projects that the city needed to borrow $32 million for, and went to
we went to an alternate approval process,
and there was a campaign.
Yeah, there was a campaign, and I have no problem with that. I want to hear from the people that would like us to do things differently. I want to hear from those that want us to, for example, the alternate approval process had a cluster of projects. I want to hear from those that support it. I want to hear from those that will support a portion and not support the others. But the alternate approval process was in place for people to come out and tell us what they wanted to have happen. No different than we went to referendum on the fire hall and the pool. And we had a resounding support for both those projects. Certainly the fire hall greater than the pool. I wasn't surprised by that. Look, when we go through a budget process, we're very diligent about where we spend dollars. But we also know in the back of our minds that we have an infrastructure that's aging and we need to start to do something about it. there was a comment made around the table, we could kick that $32 million worth of projects we could kick that can down the road continually. And we're not going to deal with it. But the council previous and this one made a determination that we were going to start to deal with it. And in dealing with that, we knew that there was going to be some tax implications, and we saw that in 2019. And we work all the time around budget to make sure that we can bring forward the lowest tax rate possible for the residents. And it's not lost on me, and I know it's certainly not lost on council.
If something had to come off the table, if you were to say, is there anything where you would be willing to make a cut to keep taxes on par?
That's a tough question without seeing the 2020 budget. And I'm not trying to avoid it, because you're going to hear loud and clear from me during budget deliberations in January. I think for me it's about taking a look at our capital projects. It's about taking a look at what we absolutely need to do and the timeline to do that, because as I said earlier, every year we wait, we're probably seeing a 10% increase. So if we have from a capital development perspective, can we get at that? Is there some that we can postpone? Infrastructure is going to be a big thing for me, and whether or not we need to streamline our infrastructure approach, that'll depend, as I say, in January. But it's really tough, Cheryl. It's tough. You set a standard, and let's use snow clearing, for example. I think we've got a great model, and we've set a standard. And in many municipalities, they don't do a lot of the things that we do, but we have been committed to that. So when you set a standard, it's very difficult to walk back on that standard. But I think I'm certainly prepared to take a look at the budget and see what we can do. That's always the approach I take.
We seem to be, compared to a lot of communities, in a bit of a bubble in terms of the development, record numbers of development, businesses that are hopping. We were down in the BCR industrial site, and it was busy.
Yep.
Is that, it's the $50 million question everyone asks. Every time we see new houses going up and new neighborhoods going up and new investment and $200 million in development permits, and you say, where is all this coming from? Do you have the answer?
Sometimes I don't want people to even ask me the question. I don't want that bubble to burst. But for me, it's a few things. I think we are a hub city. We're the northern capital. We're smack dab in the middle of the province. We have the size. We have the commercial entities, the industry to service the resource sector. And when I talk about the resource sector, it's pipelines, it's mining, it's forestry, it's LNG, and many, many companies are locating here, despite the fact that they may be doing business a couple hundred kilometers away, 400 kilometers away, whatever it might be.
How long is it going to last?
I don't know. My hope is that it lasts for a very long time. We are due. We've hit our stride. I said last time we met to do the year-end review that, I felt for a couple of years then that we were on the cusp of becoming a big city, on the cusp of being able to generate things from within. I still think we're there. All indicators, when I talk to various groups and review various economic considerations and what might happen in 2020, I see us having another pretty good year, and I'm hoping that floats into 2021. I just think, Cheryl, when it's time, you just have to take advantage of what's going on in your community, and more importantly, recognize what's going on in the region and take advantage of it. I think young people are staying here. They see this as a great place to live. Housing is affordable. If you are a recreationalist and you love the outdoors and skiing and hunting and fishing, what better place can you be? If you're into the arts, what better place can you be? And I think that they're staying. They're going to UNBC, CNC, they're working for a multitude of different organizations, and I really think that's a big part of it. And the other thing is that we have been able to attract people to Prince George through the Economic Development Office. Move Up Prince George was key to us. And people started to view us differently. And I know I always go back to 2015, but for my tenure as mayor, 2015 was a turning point for the city when the entire country got an idea what we were about and what we had to offer.
There's a lot of construction going on. In fact, if I look at the numbers from the most recent numbers at the end of October, $193 million, likely to top 200 perhaps by the end of the year. You look at what's going on, the activity around the region and the labor shortages. Are you concerned at all that some of these projects may fall off the table because you can't get trades?
Trades was always a topic of conversation when we went into these larger projects. So we've got a half a dozen of them on the go, not to mention the multiple hundreds of residential housing projects that are on the go. And I had a bit of a concern about the competition within the trades area. Would some of the tradespeople look at going off to the resource sector, whether it be mining, whether it be LNG up north? How would that impact our ability or the developer's ability to get these projects done? And for us, how would it hinder us for the fire hall and, of course, the new pool? But we're seeing, I think we're seeing a little bit of relief from that, where a number of tradespeople are making a choice, and the choice is we want to stay at home. We want to stay in Prince George. We can get work here, good paying jobs in the trade sector because there's so much development going on. But there is the odd project that is having a difficult time, there's no question, and that's why we're seeing some of the plates from Alberta and people coming in from other areas of the province, because there's work here.
This is probably the first apartment complex this city has seen in, what, 20 years?
Yeah, I would say 20 years, and it was, as you know, around the council table, it had a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
And so this is, we're on O'Grady and near Save-On and Home Depot and Canadian Tire. And there's a large waiting list. This filled up in no time. Yeah.
This is midday.
Huge waiting list to get into this location. So that generates interest by this particular developer to look elsewhere.
So here we are. We had another development coming up. I totally forgot about this until that light was put in.
Well, this one kind of takes you by surprise. We just, there hasn't been much going on in this particular
all of a sudden,
area.
there it is.
And there it is. We're on the back side of the CN Center, Kin 1 area. And what a great location. You've got green space all around you. You've got trails up into Ginter's Park.
It looks like it's got planned for quite a large
So they're starting
footprint.
the second phase here, and this backs onto the oval. I find out from the developer, where's your niche? What is your favorite housing development? And we saw in O'Grady the apartments, for example. But it goes from apartments to residential to affordable housing, subsidized housing, seniors housing that's affordable, or seniors housing that's subsidized. And if I were to pick one out of that, seniors housing. We need seniors housing. We need seniors housing in the heart. We need seniors housing in College Heights. I'd like to see another development down in the Bowl that's similar to Riverbend. But seniors housing is always top of my list. Let me brag a bit about this.
Well, I know it's a feather in your cap.
Well, and it was one of the things that I think one of the first or second phone calls I made in 2015 after I got in as mayor, and to the developer, because he had been to us previously, and it went from a conversation over the phone to what we see today, and it was really the start, Cheryl, of what I wanted to see happen in the city. Knowing full well that if we could bring A&T back to Prince George to develop Riverbend, it was just a feather in the cap of the community to be able to have this.
So we need another one of these in the heart, right?
We need another one of these in the heart, and I would say that we could probably use one, perhaps not as big, up in College Heights. Encore is the company, that nonprofit organization that runs a portion of this, and they provide pretty good services. And I know that they're looking to Prince George to do more, or looking to do more in Prince George.
I think the most recent affordable seniors housing that recently opened was by the Aboriginal Housing Society on 20th Avenue. That project.
Yes.
That's probably the last I've seen of affordable seniors housing.
Is that the one on Spruce that you're talking about? Yes. Yeah.
But it's big, but it's not huge, and I'm sure there's a wait list for that.
And there's other projects that are on, none that we're driving, but other projects that are being looked at for various areas of the bowl for seniors. And when we get into seniors housing that's similar to the river bend on the market side of it, where there are units that are for sale, that's one thing. And the other piece is if it's subsidized or affordable, of course, whoever the developer is looking for some kind of partnership with BC Housing or the province to subsidize the build on it. So that makes it a little bit more tricky to put a deal together. When you get talking about subsidized housing, low barrier housing, transitional housing, market housing, it's a huge topic, and I think you can get lost in the various degrees of housing that a community needs. So we try to do an inventory of what the need is, and like you said, in your straw poll, it's around seniors housing.
Yeah, is that probably the single largest? And the other was, of course, rentals.
Rentals, but around the seniors housing piece, it's the affordable. And there are some, we've heard loud and clear that they want subsidized seniors housing. We're in and around Edmonton Street, 4th Avenue, all the way over to 10th, between Winnipeg and Vancouver.
Yeah, it seems like it's...
It has really, there's been a real facelift here. Tremendous amount of infill on 7 and 8 and 9 avenues. And that's what we were looking for, and that's what we heard from developers, is particularly in this area, Cheryl, they wanted the opportunity to build smaller homes on smaller pieces of property.
There's a couple of incentive programs that the city's involved with, one specific to the very heart of the city, the downtown, another that's about to expire in about a year, dealing with sort of the periphery of the downtown. Is there an appetite to renew any of those incentive programs?
I think we're going to have to take a look at it next year as to whether or not we want to use that incentive package anymore. And the reason I say that is that it really has met its goal. We've got a couple of more potential projects that may occur in 2020, but we'll have to take a look at it. I'll tell you about that incentive package. It really was, I think, the piece that really put us over the top when it came to the development of a few of these major projects that you've seen, particularly if you look at Riverbend and others. It was really the thing that would bring development and investors to the city because they knew we had that.
How about tweaking that incentive program for seniors housing?
Yeah, well, that's why I say Riverbend was a piece, but yeah, you can tweak that very easily. But of course, we've got a couple of partners too with that incentive program. But I think in 2020, we're going to have to take a very close look at what we can do with it, if it's run its course. And we've known for a while that 2020 would be the year we'd have to take a look.
The new 5-year economic development plan is going to kick in the coming year, 2020 to 2025. It's different. Why was it changed?
I think the approach is it's an updated approach. It brings us into what's happening currently within the province and the country around economic development. And I think, as we talked about earlier, having the 5 clusters which more clearly identify the actual businesses and organizations, if you will, and the commercial entities that deal in various sectors was important to cluster.
The Step Up Prince George program, I believe it was called, and that there was a recognition from the industrial business community that there was that disconnect between companies wanting to start up but not knowing what would be the best way to do that?
Right.
Is that what Startup Prince George is about?
Yeah, and you know, we've looked at that for a while. There's been some work done on it, and I think what it is about us having the ability to let the industry that you're talking about realize what's happening in the area, whether it be in the mining sector, the gas sector, the oil sector. It helps, obviously, when you're wanting to start a business that supports and works within the resource sector, what's out there for potential clients, customers.
Right.
And I think that really will meet the bill. But we need to set that climate where, and I know it's an old cliche and I almost hate to use it, but you're open for business. You want to set a climate for industry like Stinger and Deltec that we've talked about, to have access to do work for these large companies that are working throughout the north.
Is that tax incentives, or what is that?
I don't think it's tax incentives. I think the climate is really around sort of, you can go and our development cost charges, for example, for buildings. It's an openness by council, development services, our economic development office, just to really help these companies get established in Prince George, and it can be as much as that. An open door. You want to get together with the mayor, you want to get together with economic development, we can do that. We can't provide tax incentives to for-profit business. We can't do that.
Oh, I did not know that.
Speaking of the economic development plan and UNBC and CNC, a kind of a different look to and feel to this economic development plan is opposed to the brain drain, the brain gain,
right.
I think it was called. And so how does a municipality facilitate those young, brilliant minds staying here?
I think it's about what we offer in our community, and I go back to what I said about our amenities. So CNC, UNBC students, if you come from Vancouver to go to one of those institutions, or you come from, if you're an international student, you come from out of the country, I want you to feel comfortable in Prince George, and I want you to recognize Prince George as an opportunity for you to stay. And we need to nurture that and be a good partner with CNC, UNBC, and other organizations within the community. Tremendous amount of research work up at UNBC. We talked about the UNBC Wood Laboratory, which are looking at research abilities to utilize wood in different ways that we've never understood or known about before. And I think that is really a marker for our city as well, when you're recognized as a community that really embraces research activity by students in the post-secondary level.
What does Campus Prince George look like to you? Paint me a picture of your vision of what, it's part of that economic development plan again.
Yeah.
What is Campus Prince George?
I think for me it's, and we started at downtown, it's about, it's a livable city. It's a city that offers all of the amenities that I just mentioned a few minutes ago. It's a city where people feel comfortable raising their family. It's a city that is vibrant and growing, and we have amenities that people, if you like dance, if you like the arts, that you have an opportunity to pursue your goal. If you want to stay and go to university at UNBC or CNC, that opportunity is there for you. So every time we gain something in our community, I see that as a plus.
There's a bit of a dichotomy with downtown Prince George. We have projects like right here, right next door to City
Park
Hall.
House development.
Right? We've got student housing coming down here. We've had a lot of commitment, a lot of investment in that area that between Vancouver and Winnipeg Street in the downtown. And then you've got this blight, I want to call it. And it's taking up a lot of energy, time, municipal energy, municipal time, municipal money, frankly. At one point, pushing $1.5 million in social services. It must be like you're banging your head against the wall some days.
That file, the work we do has been constant. At times, probably 7 days a week. It's the first thing we deal with many mornings when I come into the office. Not just me, our city manager, our staff. It's constant. And yes, what we have been doing is costing us a lot of money, from cleaning the streets, the sidewalks, tearing down homeless camps, picking up needles. It's just an array of things that we're dealing with. Bylaw services, our RCMP, our Parks Department, who are tasked with taking down the camps. That's not what their job is. Their job is, and I know they're very proud of it, their job is to go out and beautify our parks, cut our grass, deal with everything that you see that doesn't have a building on it, if you will, Cheryl, but our parks. But no, they're tearing down camps. And it's a tough issue. I speak regularly with mayors throughout the province, and it's kind of the first thing we talk about.
Yeah, a few more questions. Ruby
Sure.
Baptiste, how is Prince George going to deal with the opioid epidemic? I wish we could force our loved ones to go to treatment. They are not well enough to make that decision / choice. This will improve our whole community, less crime, etc.
Again, we can be at the table. It's people that are in the health sector, the social service sector, people that understand, people who are drug addicted or have mental illness. Cheryl, this opioid situation is a crisis. And we hear loud and clear every day that the word crisis is used from coast to coast to coast. It's not just Prince George, it's all over the country. At some point in time, there needs to be a collective gathering of municipalities of various sizes to say, look, something needs to be done. Something more than what we're trying to do now. A large part of this is dollars. It all boils down to dollars, I suppose, in almost everything we do, but it's dollars.
A comment from another city councillor was recently that if we keep just doing the same thing over and over again, there's no end in sight to it. So at some point, it's, I think, anyhow, coming to a head. I don't know, but I don't know what the answer is. So
I think the answer is that we're not going to totally get rid of the problem. I think there are solutions and steps that we can take to mitigate each one of the issues that we see on our streets. But it's going to take a concerted effort and commitment by a large group of partners to deal with it. I talked to a half a dozen business folks, they had called me and about what's taking place downtown, and yes, they're not happy about it, but they've got suggestions for us to consider. They've got suggestions for all of the partner groups to consider, and that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is, and I think one of the messages that you had talked about time and again, is the fact that there's a certain amount that a municipality can do legally, jurisdictionally, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought it up. It's all about jurisdiction and what is it that we have under our control that we can use to help out what's going on downtown, and that's from bylaw services to the RCMP. We're using our Parks Department for camp cleanups and various things like that are outside of their usual day-to-day job. So that's our jurisdiction. And beyond that, we can be a good partner, which I think we are. I think we're a great partner to the other agencies, and we need to row in the same direction when it comes to taking care and control of what's happening downtown. But I will tell you, there is no single solution, Cheryl.
No.
There's a multitude of things that we're doing and a multitude of things that will work for 4 or 5 months, and then we scrap them and move on to something else.
And this is one of them.
Yeah,
Speaking
this is
of
one
partners,
of them. Yep.
And our motors.
Yep. So this was our proposal for the integrated health model to be located here. We still have to go through a rezoning process. This location was identified as being the best location that we could look at. And for us, it was about having an integrated model where we had wraparound services, plain and just simple and plainly put. This is a location where there'll be housing, needle exchange, social service agency that can take care of the health problems, mental illness, addictions of people. So it really is a wraparound service. You can stay here and get the services and the help you need.
When there was the rezoning for the transit facility at the corner of 18th and Foothills, there was a huge hue and cry against that, and ultimately the city changed its mind. If the same hue and cry comes about that project, is the city on the hook for that project?
No,
or?
Yeah. So let me back up. We played an integral role, and I would say really a leadership role with the other two partners in that project, being Northern Health and BC Housing. So I don't want to diminish our role, and I know we're going to go through a rezoning. So we had a lot to do with that, and we have been on the forefront of making that project where it is today. And I think it's state of the art. There's maybe 2 or 3 like it in the province. You talk about the rezoning, gives the public an opportunity. I deal with every rezoning separately. If I have 4 rezonings in an evening and they're very similar, I will deal with them individually. And that's been my rule and promise to myself since I started in municipal politics or with council.
Is there any possibility of mayors, yourself, the Mayor of Kelowna, Kamloops, getting together and just perching on the doorstep in Victoria to say, look, you got to step up here?
I know we do it individually, and we got together at UBCM, the Union of BC Municipalities Conference, had a mayor's caucus, and this was front row center, and we had a real, if you will, a dichotomy there as well. Mayor Stewart from Vancouver and Mayor Leclerc from Terrace, and throughout the entire conversation, we realized that the issues were the same, only on a different scale. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, my issues are the same as Terrace, my issues are the same as Vancouver, Kelowna, but perhaps on a different scale. But yeah, that is something that we need to do as a group of mayors. We don't mind, obviously. We see that the work that we've been doing falls under our bailiwick, but there's a jurisdictional issue here. Our jurisdiction and the things we have control of are bylaw services, RCMP, and yes, I mentioned the parks and our other staff who deal with homeless camps.
Gazing at the crystal ball, 2020, right around the corner.
So I'll start with downtown. I hope that we're in a better place downtown from a social issue perspective. I hope that a couple of the projects that are on my list come to fruition downtown. And I think seniors housing is still going to be a big piece for me. I think that throughout the city, I just hope that we can continue to provide for our residents from a multitude of areas, particularly the services that we provide. I know they're important to people. I know taxes are important to people, particularly when we increase taxes. So I think that it's just going into 2020 with a positive outlook and understanding that there's a lot of work to do and there's a lot of things that come at you, Cheryl, that you don't expect. And we just need to be prepared for that, whether it's on the social issue side, whether it's infrastructure. Every day, it can change by 10 o'clock in the morning. And we just have to be prepared for those changes. And I think we're going to see some real significant development. The pool will start. And I know that we're going to continue with a lot of housing starts. There's businesses that are looking to Prince George. You mentioned West Coast Olefins. That's going to be a big topic of discussion in 2020. So I just continue to move on and hope we continue to enjoy the successes we've seen in the last few years. I would certainly like to wish everyone a happy holiday season, and I just want the residents of Prince George to know that I really hope for them a fantastic 2020 to everybody that's watching and to their families. This is a great community, and I know I say it a lot, But this has been a fantastic community to me and my family, and I know it has been to everybody else as well. So happy holiday season and Happy New Year.